Hey, it's Dave Brown here, host of Now with Dave Brown on AMI. Check out this latest highlight from the show. Bill C-22, or more colloquially, the Canada Disability Benefit, continues to twist and turn through the halls of Parliament. Last Wednesday, the House of Commons unanimously passed Bill C-22, but not everybody has been celebrating what happened. Accessibility reporter Meagan Gillmore is here with an update and to explain what happens next. Hey, good morning, Meagan.
Good morning, Dave.
So, Meagan, what's the controversy? Why is everyone not happy?
All right, so the main sticking point is that, as our audience remembers, there was an amendment put forward by the Senate that clearly stated that private insurance companies could not claw back the Canada Disability Benefit. So if you were receiving private, like long-term disability insurance, and then you were eligible for the Canada Disability Benefit, neither of those things would be affected by this. Just same concept as with the social assistance clawbacks. So this amendment applied to private insurance and contracting more generally. And that was the only amendment from the Senate that the House of Commons rejected last week before the bill was passed unanimously.
So you actually had a chance to speak with Minister Carla Qualtrough about this, about why the amendment was rejected. What reason did Minister Qualtrough have to give?
Sure, there's a few, but the main reason has to do with federal provincial jurisdiction. And here's how she explained that to me.
You know, we are grateful to the Senate for having done the study they did and having listened to the concern of the disability community. And that was really the underlying intent, as I see it, of the amendment, was really to try and get to this, you know, the concern around clawback. So the situation where provincial benefits or insurance payments are at risk of being clawed back or reduced because someone gets a payment of the disability benefit. And, you know, I've shared that concern, right? We've all heard it. You and I have talked about it, and we actually explored ways to deal with this concern through legislation. But at the end of the day, the challenge is that both contracting, so contract law, the kind of business of entering into contracts, and the insurance industry fall within provincial territorial jurisdiction. So it's really it's an area of provincial and territorial space.
So there are additional concerns that are related to that. One of them would be that had the government made this amendment, that then when they go into discussions with the provinces and territories to talk about how this benefit will look, that those discussions would become focused on areas of jurisdiction and not on the benefit itself. And then there's always the concern that there could be a lawsuit filed against the government about legislation, and that happens. Like, provinces do challenge the federal legislation in court, right? Like, see environmental law recently. So like that is a real thing. But Minister Carla did point out that insurance companies can list what benefits get deducted and what don't get deducted, and that her intent in calling the benefit a social benefit and not an employment replacement benefit, so not that it's meant to replace employment, is meant to keep the benefit from being clawed back. So to make it clear, despite not accepting the amendment, the minister does not want insurance companies to claw back the disability benefit, and here's how she explained that.
However they make their list, whether it's through regulation, whether it's through policy, I've told provinces that what they need to do is ensure that however we talk about this benefit and however they categorize it within their own systems, that it ends up on the side of the ledger. That means it's not going to be offset or clawed back.
Meagan, I'm sure the jurisdictional argument is one that would resonate with some people, but not everybody agrees. So why do some people reject the jurisdictional argument?
Sure. So for the past several months, there's been like trial lawyers and different insurance lawyers who have been arguing that there needed to be this amendment clearly placed in the legislation. And private insurance companies, at least the ones that the lawyers I've spoken to, say that they're still able to claw back the benefit. It doesn't matter how it's described by the government, because it has to do with how the insurance companies describe things in their policies. It has to do with the insurance companies' policies. So Stephen Muller from Shared Lawyers, which is a law firm in Toronto that often deals with long-term disability, he spoke to me about that. He's spoken to the Senate. He's put out a lot of statements about that and talked about how it really has to do with how insurance companies describe their policies. There is also a debate. He and others would point to case law that does show that the government actually can do something like this. So there is a debate about the case law out there on this issue. So Minister Qualtrough, for example, will use things like the Canada childcare benefit or old age security or guaranteed income as examples of benefits that don't get clawed back in long-term disability. Stephen Muller says that he's seen policies where some of those benefits are clawed back. He also makes the point that those benefits, so for example, a Canadian childcare benefit, that's intended for children. And then old age security, all those things, they're intended for people over the age of 65. This benefit, as we've said from the beginning, is intended for working class Canadians. So those who aren't covered by those benefits. So there's debate about whether or not that's a valid comparison. And the concern from a lot of these lawyers is that if we don't deal with the concern of insurance, what's going to happen is a working class individual who is not super rich, but not poor, is going to get injured. They're going to be put on long-term disability, and then they're going to lose out. Insurance companies will benefit. And it's gonna be a mess that will drag on for years. Lawyers would also point out that just because law is being challenged in the court doesn't mean that the law is suddenly of no effect because there's a court challenge going on. Court challenges take a long time. The existence of one doesn't automatically invalidate a law.
And Meagan, that is a perfect example of how so much of this is going to sort itself out. So much of this minutia is going to sort itself out in the creation of regulations. So for example, even the concern about what does this mean for someone who's working class, who's on long-term disability, who's receiving this benefit, even though there's still not even a clear idea of what that income number is that's going to create the benefit, what threshold you need to be at. So it speaks again to the importance of regulations, even after Bill C-22 creates the disability benefit, to then go into those next level of negotiations and regulations. And of course, it's not surprising, but people with disabilities want to be involved in that regulation creation process. What did Minister Qualtrough have to say about how that might look?
Sure. So there are a lot of regulations to make, and one of the finer points even on the whole insurance conversation is that there isn't a regulation that specifically deals with insurance. I mean, which kind of struck me as funny, Dave, considering all the regulations that are listed in this piece of legislation, which we've discussed many times. But so there are a lot to make, and some of them are really into fine details of minutia that normal, everyday Canadians who don't work in the government don't understand or probably don't care about, to be honest. But there are things that people will want to be involved in, and they will be, according to the minister. So some of the regulations that these are the ones that we've talked about the most, are the ones that have to do with eligibility, the amount, appeal processes, that type of thing. That those are the ones that more Canadians will want to be involved in. And the minister did say that there's a lot of work that's been done on that already. She's done roundtables. They've had disability organizations taking the lead on consulting with individuals to see what they want. People have prepared reports about what they would like to do. So we've already done that. A lot of that work has already been done. That's what the minister said. And then the regulations will go through the regular regulatory process. They'll be posted publicly. People can provide feedback, that sort of thing. And that's nothing out of the ordinary. So the extra step that's been done is everything that's been done beforehand, these roundtables, these conversations. I spoke to the minister about that. She says that she thinks people will see what they want already reflected in the regulations when the draft regulations are posted. And she said that she sees this conversation as an ongoing process.
All I can say is I we're going to do our best. And quite frankly, if someone says, you know, you've missed a group or you've not done enough in this area, then we'll dig in. Like if we need if someone says we could benefit from a national conversation on this element, let's have it. Like there's nothing to stop us from doing more. The only cautionary tale, I guess, is that could add time to how long this takes to get done.
Meagan, much like any issue that involves the disability community at large, there's not unanimity here, but you alluded to this before. There are some disability organizations that still want to be involved in the regulatory process. How do they want to be involved precisely?
Sure. So I reached out to Disability Without Poverty, who's been one of the leading grassroots groups fighting for this benefit. I did some communications work for them years ago, not related to their ideas for what the benefit will look like. And Michelle Hewitt, who's one of the national co-chairs, sent me a statement saying how, again, emphasizing that they want the regulations to be co-created, which in her words means an equal partnership between the voices of those with lived experience and the government. So this, in her mind, would mean stepping outside of the usual practices such as surveys or focus groups, and it would mean making sure that there is outreach to groups of disabled individuals who are disenfranchised or often in these processes. So people who are in remote locations, racialized groups, Indigenous people, and they really want there to be deliberative ways for people with disabilities to participate. And so that means giving people with disabilities the information that they need to fully participate, even down to these deep areas of minutia. And I got this statement after I spoke to Minister Carla, and you can already see that there is going to be, in my humble opinion, this is just Meagan's opinion as I'm talking to people about this, I think there's going to be some sticking points on this, right? Because if the minister's saying that we've already done things that technically the government does not have to do strictly under the letter of the law about how you make regulations. And then you have several individuals with disabilities saying, we want to be involved in co-creating, we want an equal voice at the table. And I think everybody's well-intended, intentions, everybody's intentions are good. People want the best benefit out there, but I think there's probably going to be some sticking points where what the government views involvement of the disability community and how people with disabilities view involvement with the government, those are two different things. And there's probably going to be some sticking points. So again, the bill does say that the government has to provide like updates about how engagement with the disability community is going. About 6 months, I believe, after Royal Assent, we have to get that. And then again, there's the 12-month time frame that is now in the law about the main regulations that would allow the benefit to be given to people. But I do think we're going to see some like disagreement and some back and forth about how exactly this quote unquote co-creation, to borrow the advocate's language, how that co-creation process should and will look.
Oh yeah, there is always going to be some dispute, whether that be about the threshold to receive the benefit, whether that be the amount of the benefit, whether or not the benefit is scaled. There's going to be a lot of conversations here, and a lot of people are not going to be happy. Even if they're generally happy about the creation of the benefit, there's going to be a lot of quibbling and squabbling about whether or not it's appropriate or executed properly, which, by the way, is totally reasonable. Like, welcome to the world of politics and poverty. Like, you need to understand that not everybody's going to be happy, and those voices do need to be heard and recognized and acknowledged.
Right. And even, and this is something that we didn't have time to include clips on for this segment, but Minister Qualtrough and I talked about reductions, right? And this isn't clawbacks. So nobody wants clawbacks. That's like her red line. She said that from the beginning of this process. But reductions as in, depending on how much money you make, right? The amount of the benefit that you receive will eventually be reduced. So if you build that into the benefit, trying to do that in a way that it's as gradual as possible and you're not leaving somebody suddenly in a lurch. I think it is important to remind people, like, this is meant to be supplementary to provincial territorial social assistance benefits. It is not meant to replace them. And also, this is part of the Disability Action Inclusion Plan, which also includes a pillar about employment.
Yes.
And giving people with disabilities who can work the opportunity to have paid, meaningful employment. So while this is an important part of that plan, and while it's been touted as the cornerstone, I think we all need to remember that there is a forest beyond all the trees of the Canada Disability Benefit. There's a lot more going on here than just this one thing, as important as it is.
Yeah, there's a big spectrum here that needs to all be considered as a wholesome process, as a program to be more inclusive towards people with disabilities, both financially and otherwise. Meagan, this is one of my favorite questions in all of broadcasting. What happens next?
Well, the House of Commons does rise at the end of this week. And the Senate will rise a week later, so at the end of next week. The bill right now is before the Senate. They've been sent a message from the House of Commons saying that, hey, thanks for your work. We accepted 5 of your 6 amendments. It's up to them. Minister Qualtrough told me that she is convinced that this will pass the Senate. She is not worried about that. She was very clear about that. From the insurance angle that we talked about, Stephen Muller talked about how provinces and territories may need to change their provincial insurance laws to prevent clawbacks when this benefit becomes a reality. So there's now that part of it. You have disability groups all sending out their statements saying the Senate needs to pass this, or provinces and territories need to start this. The federal government needs to start these conversations with provinces and territories. So again, once passed, the federal government will have that 1 year to create those significant regulations that will allow individuals to receive the benefit. That is a fairly short amount of time, given the amount of involvement that individuals with disabilities want, but Minister Qualtrough told me that she is confident that that deadline will be met.
Meagan?
I think we can absolutely make that timeline. I don't have any concern about that. And so, yes, that's kind of the bookends of how long we can take to work with the community, test ideas. I wouldn't have agreed to amendment if I didn't think we could make it, because I would never want to make a promise I couldn't keep, but I think we can do that.
Meagan, as always, I've gone over time with you because I'm so delighted to learn about this beat that you've been all over the last couple of years, especially the last couple of weeks, and cutting into your vacation time as well. Parliament in the Gillmore House of Commons had risen last week after you received your master's. As I continue to filibuster and fill time here, that's my long way of saying we're a little short for time, but you are the host of the Connecting Disability podcast. The latest episode drops this week. What do you have on deck?
Sure. So we have a conversation with Jessica Tumala, who is a 2-sport Canadian Paralympic. She's triathlete now. She was a swimmer previously. She's also an old friend of mine. So this is just a really fun chat about sport, about what she's involved in now, and about how she kind of sort of saved somebody's life last month. Oh,
wow. Meagan, always such great interviews on the Connecting Disability podcast. Thank you for taking time out of your vacation to talk to me today.
No problem. Have a good rest of the show.
That's Meagan Gillmore, accessibility reporter and the host of the Connecting Disability podcast. You can find that show on the mighty AMI Audio Podcast Network. Do you want to dive into more conversations like this? Watch Now with Dave Brown weekdays at 9 a.m. Eastern on AMI.TV or download the podcasts wherever you listen. Do you want to dive into more conversations like this? Watch Now with Dave Brown weekdays at 9 a.m. Eastern on AMI.TV or download the podcasts wherever you listen.